In the bustling city of Las Vegas, Nevada, the year 1979 was just beginning. The city, known for its bright lights and never-ending nightlife, was a stark contrast to the ordinary lives of its residents. Among them was Kim Bryant, a 16-year-old girl full of promise and dreams. She attended Western High School, where she was a sophomore, navigating the typical teenage challenges and enjoying the camaraderie of her friends. On January 26, 1979, Kim's day began like any other. She headed to Western High to register for her sophomore classes, accompanied by a friend. After completing their registration, the two decided to visit the Dairy Queen across the street. It was a popular spot among students, a place where they could enjoy a treat and catch up outside of school. As Kim and her friends stood outside the Dairy Queen, they were approached by two young men in a 1955 to 57 Chevy with silver primer paint and light spots. The men, later described as having scraggly blonde hair and medium brown hair, respectively, tried to entice Kim and her friend into their car. The girls exchanged words with the men, who then sped off down Decatur Boulevard. It was not the first time these men had attempted to lure girls from Western High School into their car that week, and their behavior had raised suspicions. At around 10 a.m., Kim called her boyfriend to ask him to pick her up from the Dairy Queen. By 10:10 a.m., Kim's friend had been picked up by her parents. When her boyfriend arrived around 10:45 a.m., Kim was nowhere to be found. Strangely, he waited 4 days before reporting her disappearance to the authorities. By noon on the day she vanished, a passing motorist had spotted a backpack in the center median on North Decatur Boulevard, the road running between the school and the Dairy Queen. Inside the bag were Kim's ID and personal belongings, adding to the growing concern about her whereabouts. Kim's mother, Sherry Elliott, and stepfather, Edward Elliott, were immediately alarmed when she didn't return home. They attempted to file a missing persons report, but the police initially suspected that Kim had run away. It wasn't until January 31st, after learning about the discovery of her discarded book bag, that Kim was officially declared missing. The search for Kim intensified as the days passed, but hope turned to despair on February 20th, 1979. A month after her disappearance, 3 young boys stumbled upon her body in a desert area near West Charleston Boulevard and South Buffalo Drive. She had been sexually assaulted and killed. The discovery was a devastating blow to her family and the community. Despite recovering DNA evidence from a suspect at the scene, the police were unable to make an immediate identification. The case quickly went cold, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and a family in mourning. Over the years, several theories emerged about who could have been responsible for Kim's death. One of the prime suspects was Stephen Morin, a serial killer operating in Las Vegas during the time of Kim's murder. Morin had been identified as the man who took Kim on a date to a skating rink about 2 weeks before she disappeared. A macrame belt similar to the one Kim was wearing on the day she vanished was found in a storage unit owned by Morin. Furthermore, Morin was believed to be responsible for the rape and attempted murder of a 15-year-old Vegas girl in April of 1980. This girl had been left at the same site where Kim's body was found. However, the head of the Metro Homicide Unit noted that other young women were found murdered in the desert under similar circumstances after Morin's arrest, complicating the theory. Another potential suspect was Bobby Jean Thomas, a local roofer with a history of violent behavior. In 1970, Thomas had been convicted of attempting to assault a woman and had also faced charges related to the death of his 14-year-old sister-in-law. Thomas was killed the day after Kim went missing, and Ronnie Lee Fain, a career criminal from California who had recently moved to Vegas, was arrested for his murder. Fain claimed he killed Thomas in a fit of rage after Thomas confessed to murdering Kim. Although Fane passed 2 polygraph exams and his guilty plea was accepted, he later attempted to withdraw his confession. Some detectives were suspicious, noting that Fane didn't even know Kim's name until his defense attorney told him. Additionally, Fane had stabbed another Vegas man to death a month before Thomas's killing, raising further doubts about his credibility. Most concerning was the detective heading the Thomas investigation, who reported that eyewitnesses had last seen Kim alive in a vehicle with 4 men. This suggested that even with Thomas's death, 3 suspects remained at large, adding another layer of complexity to the case. In 2008, there was a renewed effort to solve Kim's murder using advances in DNA technology. Investigators attempted to create a DNA profile from the suspect's semen. Following significant technological advancements in 2021, DNA from different pieces of evidence was sent to Othram Incorporated for testing. This effort was funded by a financial donation from Justin Wu, a Las Vegas resident and philanthropist. A male DNA profile was obtained and entered into Cody's, but no matches were found. This setback led investigators to turn to genetic genealogy, relatively new but powerful tool in forensic science. Genetic genealogists built a family tree of the unknown killer, which ultimately led them to Johnny Blake Peterson. Othram and the police eventually narrowed their search to a relative of Peterson who was willing to provide a DNA sample. In November 2021, 42 years after Kim's murder, it was conclusively determined that Johnny Blake Peterson had kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered Kim. Peterson, who was a 19-year-old Las Vegas resident at the time of Kim's death, had previously attended the same school as Kim, although it was unclear if they had ever interacted. He had been arrested for rape in Las Vegas in 1980, but the charges were later dismissed. Tragically, Peterson had died in January 1993, taking the full truth of his actions to his grave. The announcement of Peterson as Kim's killer brought a mix of relief and sorrow. Kim's family had finally received an answer, but it came too late for her mother, Sherry Elliott, who had passed away in June 2020 at the age of 79. She never got to see her daughter's case resolved, a poignant reminder of the long shadow cast by unresolved grief. In the small town of Carthage, Texas, Bernie Tiede was the kind of person everyone knew and loved. He had a reputation for being friendly, helpful, and down-to-earth. Bernie worked as a mortician at the local funeral home, a role that allowed him to touch many lives during their most vulnerable moments. With his warm demeanor and genuine empathy, Bernie made the grief-stricken feel seen and supported, earning a special place in the hearts of the community. It was this charm and manipulative kindness that led him to Marjorie Nugent, a wealthy widow over 40 years his senior. Their unlikely friendship began in 1990 when Bernie helped arrange the funeral of Marjorie's husband. Despite the vast age difference and Marjorie's notoriously prickly personality, the two became inseparable. To the outside world, it was a touching story of companionship and mutual support. But beneath the surface, a darker narrative was unfolding. Marjorie, known for her stern and demanding nature, had estranged herself from much of her family. Her only son, Rod, had long been pushed to the periphery of her life. Bernie, on the other hand, seemed to bring out a softer side in her, or so it appeared. In reality, Bernie was slowly entrenching himself into Marjorie's life and her finances. By 1991, Bernie had managed to have Rod disinherited from Marjorie's will, becoming the sole inheritor of her $10 million estate and gaining her power of attorney. Bernie's involvement in Marjorie's affairs raised eyebrows, but his well-established reputation as a kind and trustworthy man made it difficult for anyone to believe he could have ulterior motives. His integration into Marjorie's life was seen as a generous act of caring for an elderly woman who had no one else. The community of Carthage, always quick to embrace and support Bernie, continued to see him in a positive light. However, behind closed doors, the relationship between Bernie and Marjorie was far from idyllic. Marjorie's controlling and emotionally abusive behavior took a toll on Bernie. According to Bernie, her demands became increasingly oppressive, and he felt trapped in a situation he couldn't escape. This toxic dynamic reached a tragic climax in 1996. After 9 months of being unable to reach his mother, Rod traveled to Carthage to check on her. His concern grew to alarm when he discovered that Marjorie was missing. The house was eerily silent, and Rod's repeated attempts to contact Bernie yielded vague and evasive responses. Determined to find out what happened, Rod gained access to his mother's home and made a chilling discovery. Marjorie's body, hidden in a freezer, had been shot to death. The revelation shocked the community. The beloved Bernie Tiede, the man who had been a pillar of support and kindness, was arrested and brought in for questioning. The town was in disbelief. How could someone so universally liked commit such a heinous act? As the investigation unfolded, Bernie admitted to killing Marjorie and storing her body in the freezer. He claimed that Marjorie's controlling nature and emotional abuse drove him to a breaking point, causing him to snap and commit the murder in a dissociative state induced by the trauma of childhood sexual abuse at the hands of his uncle. Despite his confession, the court was not immediately convinced by Bernie's defense. The details of the murder were chilling, and the methodical way he had gone about covering it up suggested premeditation rather than a momentary lapse. In 1999, Bernie was sentenced to life in prison. The verdict was met with mixed emotions in Carthage. While justice seemed to have been served, many in the community still spoke highly of Bernie, describing him as a kind and generous soul despite the overwhelming evidence against him. The story took another twist in 2014. Based on Bernie's claims of committing the murder in an abuse-induced dissociative state, he was released on $10,000 bail. This development once again divided the community. Supporters of Bernie saw it as a recognition of the psychological torment he had endured, while others saw it as a miscarriage of justice. 2 years later, in 2016, the case was revisited. An unconvinced jury re-sentenced Bernie to 99 years to life, reaffirming the gravity of his crime. Throughout the various trials and sentencings, several community members continued to defend Bernie's character, painting a picture of a likable and generous man caught in extraordinary circumstances. I went to college in upstate New York, a place where the fall leaves are breathtaking, the winters are brutal, and the sense of community among the students is something special. I was in my 3rd year, and life was moving along in its usual rhythm of classes, part-time work, and hanging out with friends. That is, until something happened that would forever change the way I see people and the world around me. It was a crisp Saturday morning, and my apartment mate and I were having breakfast, chatting about the usual stuff. Upcoming exams, weekend plans, and the latest campus gossip. We lived in a cozy apartment just off campus, a place filled with the warmth of shared memories and the clutter of student life. As I sipped my coffee and scrolled through my phone, a news article popped up that made me freeze. The headline was stark and terrifying: "Mother murdered by son, college student suspected." I clicked on the article, my heart pounding. The story was horrifying. A woman had been brutally murdered in her city apartment, stabbed multiple times, and her throat slashed. The suspect? Her own son, who went to my college. The article explained that after killing his mother, he had stuffed her body into a bag. The fight had been about her deceased husband's will, and in a fit of rage, he had committed the unthinkable. As I read on, the story got even more chilling. After the murder, the son had called his girlfriend to help him move the body. She, too, was a student at our college. Together, they had transported the body and dumped it in a garbage can somewhere in New Jersey. The details were gruesome, and the thought of such violence so close to home made my stomach churn. But what really shook me to my core was the connection I had to these people. The son, whose name was Dan, worked at the campus cafeteria. I knew him well, or at least I thought I did. He was one of those people you could count on for a friendly smile and a bit of small talk. I would see him almost every day, serving food with an easygoing demeanor that made him seem approachable and kind. We had shared countless conversations about mundane things like the weather, upcoming campus events, and our favorite foods. He always seemed like a genuinely nice guy. And then there was his girlfriend, Sarah. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She had been at our apartment just 2 nights before the murder. Sarah and my apartment mate Lisa were in the same major, and they often studied together. That night, a bunch of us had gathered to play cards and hang out. I remembered sitting next to Sarah, chatting and laughing as we played. She was sweet, with a gentle laugh and a thoughtful demeanor. Never in a million years would I have guessed what she was capable of. The news article didn't just end there. It continued to detail the aftermath. Dan had been arrested, and the police were investigating Sarah's involvement. The campus was buzzing with shock and disbelief. How could someone we saw every day, someone who seemed so normal, commit such a heinous crime? And how could Sarah, who had been in our home, go along with it? As the days passed, more details emerged. It turned out that Dan had been struggling with his mother for years. Their relationship was fraught with tension, especially after his father passed away. The will had been a point of contention, and it seemed that the fight over it had pushed him over the edge. On the night of the murder, a heated argument escalated into violence, and Dan's rage had exploded in a horrifying way. The police found out that after the murder, Dan had panicked. He called Sarah, who was his confidant and partner in crime, to help him dispose of the body. Together, they had driven to New Jersey, their minds clouded by the gravity of what they had done. They hoped that by dumping the body far away, they could avoid detection. But of course, the truth has a way of coming out, and it wasn't long before the authorities caught up with them. The campus community was in turmoil. Counselors were brought in to help students cope with the shock and fear. Everyone was talking about it, trying to make sense of how someone we knew could commit such an atrocity. Classes felt different, the air heavy with unease. I found myself looking over my shoulder, wondering what other secrets lay hidden beneath the surface of the people around me. I couldn't shake the image of Dan, with his easy smile, and Sarah, with her gentle laugh. I kept replaying our interactions in my mind, looking for signs that I had missed, but there were none. They had been masters of deception, hiding their dark sides behind a veneer of normalcy. It was a terrifying reminder that we can never truly know what lies in the hearts of others. The weeks turned into months, and gradually, life on campus began to return to some semblance of normalcy. But the shadow of that event lingered. Dan was found guilty of murder, and Sarah was charged as an accomplice. Their trial was a media spectacle, drawing attention from across the state. The courtroom was filled with students, faculty, and reporters, all eager to witness the conclusion of this tragic saga. I attended the trial, unable to stay away. I needed to see it through, to find some closure. The prosecution painted a picture of Dan as a deeply troubled young man, pushed to the brink by years of conflict and resentment. They described Sarah as a willing participant, someone who had chosen loyalty to her boyfriend over moral decency. The defense tried to argue that Sarah had been coerced, that she was a victim of Dan's manipulations. But the evidence was damning. Watching Dan in court was surreal. He looked different, worn down by the weight of his actions. His eyes, once bright with friendliness, were now filled with a haunted emptiness. Sarah, too, seemed a shadow of her former self, her face pale and gaunt. The verdict was inevitable. Dan was sentenced to life in prison, and Sarah received a lesser sentence for her role in the crime. Born in Alberta, Canada, in the late 1970s, Mark Twitchell was a boy with dreams as vast as the prairies. From a young age, he was enchanted by the magic of cinema, and his greatest aspiration was to become a filmmaker. He imagined himself directing epic sci-fi adventures and spine-chilling horror flicks. Mark was especially obsessed with the Star Wars saga, and his dream project was a film he titled The Rebellion. This film, which depicted events leading up to the original Star Wars movie, was shot in full but sadly remained in post-production limbo, likely never to see the light of day. Mark's filmmaking ambitions didn't end there. He also tried his hand at creating a short horror film called House of Cards. This film, shot entirely in a rented garage in Edmonton, was meant to showcase his knack for creating suspense and terror. Yet, just like The Rebellion, House of Cards languished unfinished, forever trapped in the editing phase. While Mark's films might have seemed like the ultimate expression of his creative passions, there was a much darker side to him. Behind the facade of a budding filmmaker lurked a far more sinister obsession. This other passion, one that would eventually lead him down a path of no return, resulted in a minimum 25-year prison sentence. Around the same time Mark was engrossed in making his horror film, another man's life was taking a hopeful turn. Johnny Altinger, a 38-year-old factory worker, had recently ventured back into the dating world. He was delighted to share with his colleagues that he had scored a date with a woman he met on the Plenty of Fish dating site. For Johnny, who believed his best years were behind him, this new romantic prospect was thrilling. His co-workers, happy for him, wished him luck as he embarked on this new chapter. Johnny was over the moon about his date, eagerly agreeing to meet the woman he had only known online. When he didn't show up for work the next day, his colleagues received an email from his account, explaining that he and his date had eloped to Costa Rica. Although it was a surprise, they were understanding, willing to cover his shifts while he pursued his newfound happiness. However, Johnny's sudden resignation, also via email, left his co-workers heartbroken. They missed him but believed he was caught up in a whirlwind romance. They couldn't help but feel happy for him, imagining him living his dream life. Yet, when they tried to get Johnny's forwarding address to send his final paycheck, they were met with silence. It seemed highly unlikely that Johnny would forego a hefty sum of money. After weeks of worry, some of Johnny's friends decided to take matters into their own hands. They broke into his apartment, driven by growing suspicion about Johnny's supposed Costa Rican adventure. What they found inside only deepened their concern. Johnny's travel luggage and passport were still there. It was clear something was terribly wrong. Armed with this disturbing evidence, Johnny's friends went to the Edmonton Police Service, sparking a homicide investigation. One of the people interviewed during the investigation was none other than Mark Twitchell, the aspiring filmmaker. Johnny had sold his car to Mark a few weeks earlier, providing a potentially valuable lead. Police hoped Mark might offer insights into Johnny's state of mind or recall something significant from their interaction. Initially, they had no reason to suspect Mark. However, when he mentioned Johnny's desire to take a vacation, an obviously false claim, suspicions grew. On Halloween of 2008, police arrested Mark Twitchell as a suspect in Johnny Althinger's murder. During their investigation, they seized and analyzed all of Mark's electronic devices, searching for any incriminating evidence, texts, internet searches, anything that could link him to the crime. What they found was beyond their wildest expectations. Among Mark's files was a document titled Serial Killer Confessions. The opening passage was chilling. This story is based on true events. The names and events were altered slightly to protect the guilty. This is the story of my progression into becoming a serial killer. The document detailed the narrator's planning, failed first attempt, and successful second attempt to lure a man to his garage and murder him, using fake online dating profiles as bait. It also described dismembering the body and attempting to dispose of the remains. The horrifyingly detailed account left little doubt that it was a thinly veiled retelling of Mark's own crime. As the truth emerged, it became horrifyingly clear. Johnny had lost his life so that Mark could author a better, true crime story. At his trial, Mark tried to argue that he had killed Johnny in self-defense and that the document was purely fictional. However, another document found on his laptop, titled A Profile of a Psychopath, further undermined his defense. This second document detailed Mark's analysis of his own behavior and personality, suggesting deep-seated violent tendencies. Adding to the damning evidence was the plot of Mark's short film, House of Cards. The movie centered around an unfaithful husband lured to a secluded location under the pretense of meeting a woman from a dating website, only to be attacked and killed by a masked man. It was a grim reenactment of Johnny's murder. As the trial progressed, another potential victim came forward. Gillis Tettrell, a computer contractor, contacted the police with a story strikingly similar to Johnny's. Gillis had also been lured to a secluded location by someone he met online, only to be ambushed by a man in a hockey mask wielding a stun baton. Unlike Johnny, Gillis managed to escape and didn't report the attack out of embarrassment. His testimony provided crucial evidence of Mark's modus operandi and earned Gillis the media nickname, the one who got away. The prosecution pieced together a chilling portrait of Mark Twitchell, a violent, deranged psychopath masquerading as a filmmaker. He used his films to act out his dark fantasies, then made them a horrifying reality. The jury had no trouble convicting Mark of first-degree murder, and in April 2011, he received the maximum sentence under Canadian law, life in prison with no parole eligibility for a minimum of 25 years. Even after his imprisonment, Mark's disturbing fascination with murder continued to make headlines. He was particularly obsessed with the TV show Dexter, which followed the double life of Dexter Morgan, a forensic technician by day and serial killer by night. In May 2013, it was reported that Mark had acquired a television for his prison cell and caught up on every Dexter episode he had missed since his arrest. This revelation caused such revulsion that Dexter lead actor Michael C. Hall was confronted with the news during a live radio show in Canada. "I would hope the people's appreciation was more than some sort of fetishization with the kill scenes," Hall said. "I try to tell myself that their fixated nature would have done it one way or the other, but it seems that Dexter had something to do with it. It's genuinely horrifying." Perhaps Michael C. Hall was right. Maybe Mark Twitchell's fascination with the macabre predated his love for Dexter, and he was bound to hurt someone eventually. However, there's little doubt that the violent imagery presented in such shows can have a profound effect on some individuals, acting as triggers that turn dark fantasies into violent realities. I remember that cold December day like it was yesterday. The date was December 22nd, 2011, and the place, Northway Mobile Home Park in Fort Wayne, Indiana. a place that had always seemed quiet, almost forgotten by time, was about to become infamous for a crime so horrific that it still sends shivers down my spine. My name is Alex Bennett, and I was an acquaintance of Michael, the man who would come to be known as the monster of Northway. Michael Plumidor was a 39-year-old man who had woven himself into the fabric of our small community. To those who knew him, he was a kind soul, always willing to lend a hand. He had been a family friend, trusted enough to care for Aliana Maroney Lemon and her 6-year-old sister, little angels who didn't deserve the fate that awaited them. The day began like any other winter day. The air was crisp, the ground was hard with frost, and the sky was a pale gray, promising more snow. Aliana, a bright and cheerful 9-year-old, was sitting on the front porch, wrapped up in her winter coat, her breath forming little clouds in the cold air. Her sister was inside, playing quietly. Their mother was sick, confined to her bed, and it was Michael who had stepped in to help. He had been a constant presence since the girl's grandfather, James Lemon, had passed away a few months prior. James Lemon had been a tough old man, set in his ways, but with a heart of gold. He had met Michael in a correctional center, where both of them had been detained for different reasons. Despite their pasts, they had formed a close bond. James had trusted Michael with his life, and after his death, that trust had extended to his family. No one could have imagined the darkness that lay within Michael, the evil that would soon be unleashed. On that fateful morning, Michael's demeanor was calm, almost too calm. There was no indication of the horror about to unfold. Aliana was outside, enjoying the last moments of her short, innocent life. For reasons still unknown, Michael's mind snapped. He saw a brick lying nearby and, in a moment of madness, picked it up. The first blow to Aliana's head was swift and brutal. The poor girl didn't even have time to scream. He struck her repeatedly until she lay still, lifeless. In his later confession, Michael described the event with a chilling lack of emotion. He recounted how he had placed Aliana's body into a large trash bag and stored her in a freezer until nightfall. That evening, under the cover of darkness, he used a hacksaw to dismember her body, cutting it into several pieces. Some of these he left in the freezer, but the rest he carried to a nearby Marathon gas station, looking for a dumpster to dispose of them. Michael's plan was to get rid of Aliana's body piece by piece, but he was careless. The community soon noticed Aliana's absence, and the police were called in to investigate. They searched high and low, questioning everyone, including Michael, who played the role of the concerned family friend to perfection. But his facade began to crack under the pressure, and soon, the police discovered Aliana's head, hands, and feet hidden inside his home. The news hit our small community like a sledgehammer. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. Michael had been one of us, someone we trusted. The revelation of his past crimes, trespassing, assault, and his close association with James, a registered offender, added to the horror. It turned out that the trailer park was a haven for people with dark pasts, a fact that had remained hidden until this tragedy. Michael was arrested and eventually sentenced to life in prison. Justice was served, but it brought little comfort. Aliana's death left a gaping wound in the heart of our community, a wound that still hasn't fully healed. Her mother, who had already been dealing with the loss of her father and her own illness, was shattered. The image of that little girl, with her bright smile and boundless energy, haunts me to this day. I've lived in Georgia my whole life. It's a place where stories are as thick as the summer humidity, but not many of them come out of the middle of the state. It's quiet here, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like time moves just a bit slower. My family and I have always found some comfort in that. Life is predictable, safe, until it isn't. My cousin, who I'll call Mark, has been a police officer for 5 years. Mark's always been a bright-eyed optimist, the kind of guy who genuinely wants to make a difference. Corny as it sounds, he joined the force to help people, to be a light in the darkness. But even in the heart of Georgia, darkness finds a way to creep in. One day, Mark got an alert from a house somewhere between Macon and Alberta. This house, from what people said, had been abandoned for years. That should give you an idea of its state. Falling apart, forgotten, a shell of a home that nobody cared about anymore. But someone had called from there, and it was Mark's job to find out why. When Mark and his partner arrived, they saw an older gentleman sitting on the steps outside the front door, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. As they got closer, they could see that he was crying. No, not crying, but sobbing and muttering something to himself about how awful it all was. His eyes were red and puffy, his face a mask of anguish. They tried to talk to him, but he was completely incoherent, lost in his trauma. Mark's partner called for another car, while Mark drew his gun and decided to enter the house. The smell hit him first, rancid and overpowering, like nothing he'd ever encountered before. He told me later that it was the smell of death, thick and putrid, filling the air with its decay. The kitchen and living room were a total wreck, clear signs that the owners had been hoarders. Pots and pans stacked to the ceiling, spoiled food littered everywhere, takeout containers scattered across the floor. It was a disgusting sight, the kind that makes your stomach churn. As procedure dictates, Mark called out to see if anyone would answer. Silence. His heart rate began to spike, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Gun at the ready, he checked the living room, empty. He made his way down the hall, the smell growing stronger with each step. He covered his mouth and nose as he reached what he suspected was the bedroom door. Inside the bedroom, he found 2 corpses, gray-skinned and covered in flies. Despite his churning stomach, Mark forced himself to get a closer look. One was a man, the other a woman, both in advanced stages of decomposition. The skin on their faces was starting to fall off, flies buzzing in and out of their open mouths, landing on their eyes. Then Mark saw something that he says he'll never forget. The woman was holding a smaller body, an infant, equally lifeless. A large cockroach crawled out of the dead baby's mouth, and that was it. Mark ran outside, doubled over, and vomited all over the steps where the old man had been sitting. When backup arrived, they did a more thorough inspection. The old man, it turned out, was a former co-worker and friend of the dead man. They had worked together at a local peach packing company. When his friend hadn't shown up for over a week, the old man went to the house to check on him, only to be greeted by the horrifying sight that had left him traumatized. As the pieces of the story came together, a grim picture emerged. The husband and wife had become addicted to opioids after a surgery a year or so before. Their addiction spiraled out of control, escalating to heroin. Their daughter, no more than a couple of years old, died of neglect. Finding their baby's corpse pushed the couple over the edge, and they decided to end their own lives. The coroner found enough heroin in their bodies to kill them twice over. Mark is still on the force, but that night changed him. He started drinking more, trying to drown the memories of what he had seen. He's been going to therapy, and he's managed to get his drinking under control, but the nightmares persist. Almost every time we talk, he mentions the baby. In his dreams, the baby is still crying, its lifeless eyes staring up at him. I remember one particularly vivid conversation we had over a couple of beers. Mark was more introspective than usual, staring into his drink as if it held the answers to all the questions that haunted him. "You know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I can handle a lot of things. Blood, guts, violence. It's part of the job. But seeing that baby, knowing she suffered, it just breaks something inside you." He told me about the therapy sessions, the struggles to open up, to relive those moments in a safe environment. "Talking about it helps," he admitted, "but sometimes it feels like I'm just ripping open the wound again and again. Some nights, I can't even close my eyes without seeing that house, that family." Mark's journey hasn't been easy. His optimism has been tempered by the harsh realities of his job. The world isn't as black and white as he'd hoped, and the lines between good and evil blur more often than not. But through it all, he's remained committed to his duty, to protecting and serving, even if it means carrying the weight of those dark memories with him. Life in Georgia continues at its slow, steady pace. The fields are still green, the summer's still hot, and the people still kind. But for Mark, and for those of us who know his story, there's an undercurrent of awareness now. A reminder that even in the quietest places, the shadows can be deep and the darkness all too real.